He was America's go-to morning voice for more than 2 decades, providing news to millions of homes and interviewing celebrities and presidents. At the peak of his career, Matt Lauer appeared unbeatable and amassed an estimated wealth of $100 million. However, everything fell apart in one morning in November 2017. As they informed viewers about his inappropriate sexual behavior, his co-hosts had to break their voices to announce his firing live on television. What came next? Insiders claim that the once powerful TV personality has become a loner who only wants to speak with like-minded individuals after disappearing from public life and losing friends. However, this is what actually transpired behind those cameras that no one anticipated. When Matt Lauer started contributing regularly to The Today Show in 1994, he began his rise to prominence as America's morning television king. In contrast to other reporters who slogged through news segments and celebrity interviews, Lauer had a natural charm that drew people in every morning. NBC saw his promise by 1997 and elevated him to co-host with Katie Couric. His domination in morning television began with this. Millions of Americans began to rely on Lauer as their go-to source for entertainment, news, and weather updates. As his fame grew, so did the financial rewards. After rising from hundreds of thousands to millions, his yearly compensation reportedly reached $25 million. As a result, he became one of America's best-paid TV personalities, making more money for presenting a morning program than many CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. Lauer lived an opulent lifestyle, amassed a collection of Hamptons real estate, and relished the seemingly unassailable employment security. However, a darker pattern was beginning to emerge beneath this polished public image. Viewers saw the affable host who made their mornings more cheerful, while his co-workers saw something very different. Rumors started to spread about awkward interactions, offensive remarks, and conduct that went beyond professional bounds. These topics were limited to private messages and hushed chats in break rooms during the early 2000s and 2010s. No one in the network felt ready to take on someone with Lauer's degree of authority and clout. The famous performer was bringing in a lot of money for NBC. The Today Show generated hundreds of millions of dollars in advertising income and continuously dominated morning television ratings. It is common for hard concerns to be minimized or ignored when a personality brings in such large sums of money for a network. It was clear that those awkward questions were starting to come up around Lauer. Subsequent reports indicated that the network was aware of settlements and grievances years prior to his firing. But he was just too vital to lose, so they kept him in his place. This was more than a single man's career. It symbolized a whole media empire based on his character from the morning show. His presence was appreciated by advertisers. His delivery was trusted by viewers, and NBC stockholders were still happy with the earnings he produced. However, media empires built on shaky foundations eventually fall apart, and Lauer's was on the verge of a dramatic collapse. When it would occur was the question, not if it would. One complaint eventually broke through all the defense and authority that had encircled him for decades. On a chilly November morning in 2017, NBC was blind to the fundamental changes taking place in the entertainment sector. Strong men who believed they were untouchable were finding their security had vanished. As the Me Too movement gained unheard of traction, Lauer was on the verge of becoming the most well-known victim of this cultural shift on morning television. Even industry insiders, who believed they had seen everything, were taken aback by the way he fell. Although the warning signs had been there for years, they were not readily apparent when he was in the spotlight. A masterclass in upholding deceptive appearances was demonstrated by the discrepancy between Matt Lauer's private conduct and public persona. In fact, throughout his broadcast appearances, the warning indicators of his bad behavior were evident, but they were written off as embarrassing incidents rather than warning signs. In hindsight, the Anne Hathaway interview from 2012 became especially significant. Instead of talking about her movie or professional accomplishments, Lauer decided to talk about the paparazzi images that had infringed on her privacy. He treated an intrusive invasion of her privacy as entertainment news and centered the conversation around what he called a wardrobe malfunction. In her remarkably composed response, Hathaway emphasized that society shouldn't commercialize the sexuality of unwilling participants, and that photographers shouldn't be capturing such images. Her well-written rebuttal made clear how improper Lauer's strategy was. However, the episode exposed a disturbing aspect of his views on women's privacy and limits. His conduct during his interview with Sandra Bullock was also troubling. What should have been a professional promotional interview turned into something more akin to locker room commentary. When Lauer made repeated references to seeing her nude in a movie, she was clearly uncomfortable, but he kept bringing up the subject, making jokes about her naked scenes being his screensaver. The ease with which he made such remarks to well-known celebrities hinted at how he would act with staff members, who were much less able to protest his actions. Several sources claim that as Lau's power increased, his behavior behind the cameras became more problematic. According to reports, there was a culture at the Today Show where making offensive remarks or acting inappropriately was accepted, and anyone who voiced concerns was either shunned or fired. Later, footage showed Lauer saying improper things when he thought the cameras weren't filming. He once requested a female employee to keep a hunched-over posture because he liked the view. These circumstances were especially concerning because of the power dynamics. His remarks, as the show's star and successful manager, fostered an atmosphere in which staff members felt powerless to protest. Female staff members expressed feeling uneasy around Lauer, but also helpless to change the situation. He was the main source of income for the show. The celebrity is bringing NBC millions of dollars. It felt like career suicide to voice reservations about his actions, especially because the network seems more concerned with defending their lucrative star than with resolving issues at work. According to sources, Lauer made remarks about the looks of female colleagues, asked improper inquiries about their personal lives, and created circumstances that went over professional limits in a number of instances. Resistance was all but impossible due to the disparity in power. It took incredible guts to challenge someone who could potentially end careers with a single phone call. Ann Curry's story came to represent these processes at work. She should have been treated equally as co-host, but in her last months, she endured what she later described as professional agony. When female colleagues approached her seeking aid with Lauer's behavior, she attempted to raise their concerns to human resources. NBC kept Lauer's job and $25 million pay while firing Curry instead of resolving the issues. The network's response made it clear to all staff members that their top performer would not be accepted. Lauer continued to be too significant, too lucrative, and too essential to NBC's success to be held accountable. Without any real accountability, this setting permitted his behavior to worsen. Everyone knew that the network would put its income generator ahead of the well-being of its employees. Lauer allegedly became entitled to a situation where he was exempt from standard working regulations. It becomes dangerously tempting to believe that one is immune from consequences when one receives treatment as irreplaceable and makes $25 million a year. The terrible thing about this issue was how many lives and careers were lost, while NBC remained protective. Instead of working in secure and encouraging surroundings, female employees had to deal with someone whose actions made their jobs uncomfortable at best and traumatic at worst. Power structures based on victim silencing, however, have their limits, and Lauer's was drawing near. At last, someone was ready to breach the barrier of defense that surrounded him. When one woman made the decision that silence was no longer an option, the collapse started. When NBC executives received a thorough complaint in late 2017, the accusations were too serious and specific to be handled by their prior strategies of media management and quiet settlements. Lauer's career was ruined by an incident that happened during the 2014 Winter Olympics in Sochi, Russia. The accusation claims that Lauer ran into a female NBC employee at a hotel bar after she had had a lot of alcohol. What purportedly transpired next became the proof that finally ruined his decades-long career. The contact swiftly turned out to be non-consensual, as Lauer invited her to his hotel room. According to the woman, she said that Lauer participated in sexual behavior that she had not consented to and had repeatedly refused, even though she was drunk and unable to give her consent. NBC officials were unable to reject or quietly resolve the complaint due to the specific depth of these charges. Other victims had the confidence to speak out about their own experiences when this complaint was made public. A former producer of the Today Show claimed wrongdoing as early as 2001. According to her, Lau called her into his office to talk about work, then asked her to unbutton her shirt before locking the door. She claims that once the encounter turned into non-consensual sexual intercourse, she became so scared that she passed out and needed Lauer's aid to help her. The fact that his own secretary allegedly had to escort a lady for medical care following an interaction with Lauer in his office raises serious questions about what NBC knew and when they knew it. However, it appears that the network was not sufficiently alarmed by this incident to look into it or take any action at the time. Other ladies came forward with comparable stories. When she refused to have sex with Lauer, he allegedly exposed himself to her at his office, and then subjected her to professional reprisal. An adult toy with a note, explaining how he planned to use it with her, was described by another as an improper gift. There was no denying the pattern. Several women spanning multiple years, citing consistent behavior where Lauer exploited his position of responsibility to create situations where they felt obligated to comply with his advances, followed by professional consequences if they refused. Suggestions of institutional awareness inside NBC gave these accusations more credence. According to sources, the network used non-disclosure agreements to covertly settle various complaints over a number of years, silencing victims while permitting Lauer to carry on with his actions. If true, this implied that NBC was effectively encouraging predatory behavior while making money off of his ongoing presence. After Ronan Farrow, an investigative journalist, looked into these allegations, NBC released a statement describing the cited deals as standard leave agreements, unconnected to misbehavior charges, and rejecting any covert settlements. But according to Farrow, who had played a key role in bringing the Harvey Weinstein affair to light, there was proof and paperwork that such payments existed. Because the Sochi tragedy embodied all the worst aspects of the situation, it became very harmful. The most dependable morning host for NBC, who was representing the network at one of the biggest athletic events in the world, is accused of taking advantage of a weaker coworker. In addition to the human cost, the crisis had disastrous network optics. This time also provided new background for Lauer's history of poor on-air behavior. His 2006 interview with Britney Spears came under intense scrutiny because he exploited paparazzi images to cast doubt on her ability to be a mother, and basically made her cry live on TV. This interview was later used in documentaries that looked at how the media treated Spears, showing how it exacerbated rather than helped her mental health issues. NBC couldn't have come at a worse cultural moment. Leaders in the entertainment industry had previously shown through the Harvey Weinstein crisis that they could use their influence to keep victims silent for decades. Audiences were no longer prepared to overlook wrongdoing by their favorite celebrities. As the Me Too movement reached its zenith, NBC was in a precarious position. They would face severe public criticism and possible legal repercussions if they continued to defend their highest-paid star. They were unable to use their prior crisis management techniques because the complaint was too specific, the proof was too strong, and the cultural moment was too sensitive. After years of safeguarding their $25 million investment, the network executives abruptly recognized that keeping Lauer would be significantly more expensive than letting him go. However, they were also aware that firing him would cause a stir on morning TV and prompt grave inquiries about their own involvement in permitting his actions. No one could have predicted how swiftly and totally everything would fall apart after that initial complaint penetrated their defenses. Matt Lauer's career came to an end on November 29, 2017, and he began a total withdrawal from public life. His co-hosts had to break the devastating news to millions of viewers who had relied on him for decades after NBC executives decided to fire him so quickly that Today Show staff only found out about it hours before it went live. Announcement of their colleagues' termination due to inappropriate sexual behavior was difficult for Savannah Guthrie and Hod Kopp. Viewers who had welcomed Lauer into their homes every morning for more than 2 decades were incredulous. As evidenced by the obvious shock on their faces, it was seen by many as a basic breach of trust. The initial effects were disastrous. Overnight, Lauer went from being one of the most well-known media personalities in America to becoming a total industry outcast. He would not be considered for a job by any network. He wouldn't get a job with any production business. Furthermore, the harm to his reputation could not be undone by wealth or connections. The financial impact was significant. His $25 million yearly salary was immediately terminated by NBC. Furthermore, Lauer did not receive any further money beyond what he had previously earned. In contrast to some celebrity scandals that involved golden parachutes or covert severance packages, the network made it quite evident that they were completely cut off from their former star. It's possible that the personal expenses outweighed the financial and professional losses. The man who used to dominate attention at every professional event and Hampton's social gathering, according to people close to Lauer, found himself utterly alone. Almost instantly, the social circle that had previously centered around his famous status dissolved. Old acquaintances stopped calling, and invitations stopped coming. He had reportedly lost many of the friendships of those who first kept in touch before halting their outreach. Sources described him as increasingly selective about his interactions, preferring to associate only with persons who would back his version of events rather than challenge him to confront reality. Geographic retreat was another aspect of the isolation that went beyond social groups. According to reports, Lauer stayed at his Hampton house most of the time, expelled from the media landscape of New York City, where he had previously had a dominant position. The personality that had flourished on frequent engagement and public attention turned inward, shunning public appearances and staying far away from the limelight. After reportedly struggling for years, his marriage to Annette Rowe ended in divorce. According to sources, Rowe had stayed in the marriage for the benefit of their children, and to further his career even though he was aware of Lauer's extramarital affairs and abusive behavior long before the public crisis surfaced. According to reports, even prior to the accusations being made public, they had effectively been leading separate lives. The extent to which Lauer's actions had affected his family was made clear during the divorce procedures. Rowe had suffered years of humiliation in private, and whatever was left of their marriage fell apart when the accusations were made public. Her husband's actions were made public, which served as both confirmation and more trauma. Lauer's seeming inability to take full responsibility for his acts was especially indicative of his current state of mind. According to others close to him, he thought the punishment was excessive for the claimed offenses and felt unfairly handled. This victimizing rather than responsible mindset contributed to the failure of his meager recovery efforts. He published an opinion post in 2019, defending himself against certain accusations in an effort to re-enter the public conversation. It was a spectacular failure. The article seemed tone-deaf and self-serving rather than exhibiting regret or personal development, which confirmed the public's belief that he still did not comprehend the seriousness of his conduct. There was some change in his dating life when rumors surfaced that he was seeing marketing executive Shaman Abbas. Even this new relationship, though, brought to light his ongoing alienation from his former life. The awkward circumstances that arose from the couple's attendance at Hampton's events, where his ex-wife was also present, emphasized how his past still followed him. Although it wasn't disastrous, his financial circumstances did drastically shift. He apparently kept a sizable fortune from his years of high income, but his opulent way of life needed to be adjusted. Although real estate investments offered some financial stability, the days of unrestricted spending and the benefits that came with being a television princess were long gone. Most notable about Lauer's post-scandal existence was his almost complete withdrawal from public knowledge. Lauer has been virtually silent in a time when discredited celebrities frequently try to make a comeback via podcasts, social media, or other channels. No autobiography, no interviews about redemption, and no slow return to the public eye. This absence implies that he either understands how seriously his reputation has been harmed, or that he still has hope that he will one day become well known again. According to either reading, the subject is essentially unaware of the gravity of his predicament and the irreversibility of his decline. Matt Lauer's demise went beyond personal wrongdoing to represent structural issues with how the entertainment industry treats influential men and their victims. His case brought to light the poisonous atmosphere that tolerated inappropriate behavior as long as it did not jeopardize financial results. His dismissal at a time when the Me Too movement was at its height turned his controversy from another celebrity's collapse into evidence that no one was above the law, regardless of their publicity or financial worth to employers. NBC's handling of the situation created a blueprint for corporate crisis management and responsibility. They sent a message to other networks and companies that conventional approaches to handling these problems were ineffective by firing him right away, without trying compromising solutions or waiting for legal action. Willful ignorance and quiet settlements were no longer viable. The influence went well beyond morning TV. Networks across the industry began evaluating employment regulations, adopting tougher reporting procedures, and scrutinizing their own high-profile people who might be participating in similar behavior. The culture that has allowed these situations to continue for decades was confronted by the entertainment industry as a whole. Lauer's termination was a significant turning point for victims of violence and harassment at work. It proved that significant offenders can face repercussions for speaking up, something that only a few years before had seemed unthinkable. What many others before her were unable to accomplish was true accountability, which was attained by the woman whose complaint brought him down. However, the case also revealed the institutional failings that had allowed such behavior to continue for so long. If rumors of earlier settlements and unanswered concerns were true, It indicated that NBC had long put financial gain ahead of worker safety. Questions concerning what the company knew, when they knew it, and why they hadn't taken action sooner were raised. This resulted in changes to the media landscape itself. Morning show dynamics altered, with networks becoming more concerned about power imbalances and workplace relationships. When businesses realized the financial and reputational costs of neglecting these issues, the casual misogyny that had become commonplace in many entertainment workplaces abruptly vanished. Lauer's story also served as a cautionary tale about the perils of basing a brand on a single person. Because NBC had made such a significant investment in his reputation and career, they were exposed to this kind of controversy. He took a large chunk of their mourning to establish credibility with him after he fell.